Welcome to another episode of Oratio Podium. Today we are joined by Raymond, who is an experienced debater from Southeast Asia, specifically Malaysia. I'm pretty sure that his experiences will be valuable towards our listeners and viewers as well in terms of his journey and his oversight into, say, different debate nuances and different debate experiences. We are glad to have you on board. If you could just briefly introduce yourself for our guests. That's very interesting. I think there are quite a few people who are in law who also like to do debating on the side. In the sense that there are a lot of good like rhetorical devices and other things that you utilize when you're doing law, which makes you good at debating or maybe say interested in debating too. But sometimes people prefer moot courts as well, if that's the thing. So very interesting. I think we can start off from there. Like, how did you like really get into debating? What was your first foray into debating and where did you start?
Ironically enough, my first introduction into debating was when I was in Form 1, which is around 13 years old, when I first started going to debating. It's a competition called Datoria, so it goes from the district level to the state level to the national level. And the reason I wanted to join debating initially was because, oh, I thought it's a fun activity where it's impromptu and you get to learn a lot. Um, I think part of it was also motivated by very funnily enough, Ben Shapiro, the right wing influencer, because I was like, I wanted to own the liberals, I want to like mic drop and everything. And I went into debating thinking I'm gonna like absolutely wreck everyone there. And that was my introduction into debating. That was why I joined debating in the first place. Obviously that motive has changed quite significantly ever since I actually started debating competitively. But that was my first ever entry into debating. Because this is like a state competition, so obviously I go to different places and I just compete there. I think it's the only competition that I went into that wasn't so it's judged by teachers, so it's not like a very pleasant experience, and a lot of it is just like very impromptu, but you also get like prepared motions and everything, and a lot of it is like very like rhetoric heavy as opposed to being analysis heavy. So um during my form 1 to my form 3, which is when I was 13 to 15, that was the main form of debating that I would go for, because um from where I'm from, East Malaysia, Sarawak, there's not a lot of like debating resources. So especially where I'm from as well, because I'm from Cebu, which is like a more like suburban-ish area. So people there don't usually do debating. To them, like most people they speak Chinese. So as someone that speaks predominantly English, it's very hard for me to be able to like encourage debating in these areas. So to me, whenever I engage in this sport, it's something that I always do with like a very select few people, and even then, it's very hard to sustain or to find people that would be interested to join debating. So that was my first ever entry into debating, I would say.
Very interesting. There was a couple of things that you mentioned which struck out a lot in terms of how the conversation becomes important here as well, right? Because you mentioned things like in certain places in debating, people use rhetorical devices more. In some places, people use analytical, logical devices more. So, how do you like separate these particular nuances? Do you think there's a very important consideration when we are doing this, and how did you find it different from transitioning from one to the other?
I think the biggest difference is just in terms of how, when would you really weaponize it. So I think the best illustration of this is to use analysis and then couple that together with illustrations and examples. Back then I was a very big advocate for no example, don't use example. But as I moved further and further into debating, I realized that real life examples and illustrations of these things, very graphic illustrations maybe, are perhaps very important in terms of convincing people. Because I think um debating isn't just about convince like you're the average intelligent voter, so I feel like the average intelligent voter should be persuaded by emotion, should be persuaded by things like rhetoric as well. So I think to me the very clear way to differentiate between the two is that I always view debating to be public speaking but a bit more analytical. So I would just say that in terms of how do I view the mix of analysis and like rhetoric, I would say that the best example would be the merging of illustrations and examples together with certain analysis that you will get from debating. I think that's by far the most persuasive I've seen people use rhetoric in terms of debating.
There are also like a couple of things that come around here, that you have this idea that maybe perception of the judges become very important. You mentioned the average reasonable voter, but the average reasonable voter isn't really average, right? There was another conversation I was having with a guest beforehand. So how do you like jump around and like figure things out as a novice or a person who's entering this? Because a lot of people have different value systems here. For example, when you were mentioning things around providing examples in argumentation, I was also a very strong advocate, still am, that examples don't build logic, but only substantiate logic in your arguments. So how do you find this like probably utilized better in terms of how you're addressing these concerns about average reasonable voters, and how you can sort of like tiptoe around these considerations?
Even the average reasonable voter have like certain value system that they like have. I do think that the best example of this is that because I read a lot and I'm a very enthusiastic reader and I read the news a lot also. I guess the best example of this is to just use examples that are a bit more proximate to certain people. So sometimes when I have like a Filipino judge, I'll be like, okay, here are examples of Filipino politics. So or if I have like a European judge, I would talk about like European politics, what's happening right there. I think these are all things that I try to do, which is just to use my existing knowledge to make sure that what I am saying appears to be reasonable in the eyes of like judges from very different backgrounds. So to me, I think it has worked to some extent. So even in Malaysia, for example, if you throw around examples of Mahathir or Najib or the DAP party, people like click immediately. But I don't think that clicks similarly in places elsewhere, like the Philippines or Singapore. I think in those places, I guess that's the beauty of debating, right? Is that you are encouraged to pursue a wider range of knowledge about different places and different countries. And I think to me, it has also been one of my main motivations to continue reading and to continue pursuing knowledge about different countries, because to me, it's like not only is it just like very interesting to learn about these things, like learning about the like legacy or dynasty kind of politics in the Philippines, or learning about the reign of the PAP in Singapore, I feel like are very, very interesting. I also feel like it's something that I can use to be able to cater to what would be deemed the average reasonable voter in those areas. So I think to me that's how I work around it, which is just to be a bit more like selective in the kinds of examples that I use. So if I know that they are from the Philippines, I'm like, okay, can I think of any Filipino examples? Or they're from Singapore, like, okay, the PAP, Lee Kuan Yew, Lee Hsien Loong. I'm like, okay, if they know these names, then that's good enough for me.
So, in terms of some debates as well, you would see that there are very specific motion which deal with certain nuances in, say, regional context. So, if you're debating internationally and you've gone into, say, a country like India or a country like Hong Kong, a place like Hong Kong, sorry, where you have like a discussion around these particular issues which are very specific towards those particular domains, how do you sort of like allay or give those examples properly? Because you can't always have the most approachable, like, addressing factor for, say, the judges, because you don't really know local examples. So how do you like sort of go around those ideas?
I think the best example of this I saw is in the Australian Debating Council YouTube channel. I think it was a video by Robert Barry that said like, how do you debate something that you know completely nothing about? And I think a lot of it is just to like debate oftentimes is grounded in context. And if you have context, that's advantageous. But it's not outright winning. Like if you don't know the context and if your CA is good enough, even absent of context, you can still win the debate. I think the recent example of this is in a tournament that I capped, which is NLS um, I, uh, NLSPD, National Law School in India, and there was a motion about Catalonia. And evidently, teams don't really know a lot about the context behind Catalonia, but they're still making like pretty good speeches about like why is the referendum bad, what like would this like the media scrutiny argument, like first principles about like the obligation of the state, those kinds of things can also occur. So I think to me, it's like even if you don't know context, it is fine because um certain arguments don't really need you to have context in order for it to be super super persuasive and can still win debates um absent of those contexts. So I'm a very big believer in the if you don't know you should know kind of philosophy. So if you've seen some of the if you've seen past motions that I've have, it's always a bit more like specky-ish, like not like very very specky, but like you obviously need some baseline knowledge about these things happening already. So to me, I'm like if you don't know about it, you hopefully after the round you know about it. But even if you don't, I hope it encourages you to read more about it, because I think a very big purpose of debating is not just to win rounds or to break to the out rounds. It's also just to, like share knowledge, share information, and find different contexts that you think are very, very interesting. So a recent tournament I went to, Taylor's AP. I like every single round afterwards, I just be googling stuff like, okay, what is clerical celibacy? What is it really grounded in? What is like an unconstitutional amendment or whatever? I think like it just encourages me to read more about different things, and I think that just makes me like, I don't know, it just makes me a bit more enthusiastic about pursuing knowledge and broadening my horizon when it comes to not just domestic information, but like things that are happening like regionally and globally as well.
There's an interesting transition that comes around here, right? Because you were mentioning things about international knowledge and gathering, say, knowledge as a debater and getting better at the domain that you're in. So, what kind of tips or tricks do you think is suitable for people who are trying to get into the field of accessing knowledge from beyond their own, say, regions, or maybe increasing their knowledge as a debater for the foundational concepts of things?
I feel like the best thing, the most important thing is that you obviously have to be interested in it, right? Like if you're not interested in the topic, there's just no reason for you to want to like learn more about it because you're just either going to fall asleep or you're going to be very easily distracted by other things that might be happening around you. So I think the best way to use it is to, I think, find a very baseline topic that you're at least interested in. So let's say that you're interested in things like K-pop, for example, which a lot of people are. Then slowly they can transition into how the K-pop industry manages their idols. It can also transition to ideas about the South Korean economy, things like chaebols or whatever, and then gradually also start learning about like the behind the scenes of these things and the behind the scenes of the K-pop industry, and you learn about things that are just beyond the very superficial nature of like pop culture and like K-pop. You also learn about other things that might not be super like in the news like super in the news or very into pop culture. The same thing with politics, like maybe you're into Malaysian politics or maybe you're into like Malaysian elections. So you like go on Wikipedia, you read up about it. But I think if you're interested in that, that obviously branches out into learning about Malaysian politics in general. And then it may gradually learn into things like Southeast Asian politics, how there's a very big difference between Malaysia, maybe between Malaysia and the Philippines, Malaysia and Vietnam, for example. And then you start learning about those things as well. And then when you learn about those things, you also branch into other things that you might be interested in. Maybe it's the economic policy of Vietnam. Maybe it's the um nine dash line. Maybe it's certain like current conflict that is existing within like Southeast Asia when it comes to territorial disputes. A lot of these things that you are able to branch off. And I think what is very important is that at least the foundational knowledge must be something that you're interested in, because it is only when you're interested that's where you branch into different things and you might find those things to be interesting. So I'm always a big advocate of um not like just studying like aimlessly, but also just find something you're interested in and then use that as the I guess like the what is it the foundation for you to gain more and more knowledge in the future about different things that you might not know that you're interested in, but then you find out that you are interested in those things, and that's I think pretty wonderful.
True. I think the very important consideration here is that when we are discussing these aspects, there's another commonplace problem that we face, right? Because people have sometimes too much knowledge on a certain issue. Sometimes they have subconscious biases or things that they have already believed in, have preconceived notions in. So, how do you think that, for example, if there is a judge, how do you like check in your biases to see that the subjectivity does not come into your judging? Or maybe if you're, say, a speaker, how do you understand that those biases can become problematic for your argument framing and then sort of work around them as well?
The most so to be fair, I've had the privilege of not really experiencing judges that have these kinds of biases very evidently. So even if they think like liberalism or like left wing ideologies are better, there's always judges that counteract against that by saying that you can't just say that left wing good, right wing bad. You have to substantiate these kinds of things. I think the biggest bias I've seen in a lot of judges is not particularly knowledge bias, because I feel like in the debate circuit itself, both locally and globally, there's been the idea that you shouldn't be very interventionist. You should be more open to different ideas, different ideologies. I think the more noticeable kind of bias in debating has always been either rap bias or accent bias, where I think it's a bit more noticeable. So when I went to work with my accent, I think it's significantly disadvantageous because I think people don't really understand me a lot. Um, Similarly with rap biases, I've seen people that um like I've seen judges like secretly come up to me and be like, oh I agree that it's very close. I feel like it's a lot more convenient to give it to the rapier team because then I think it's a lot easier to justify. These kinds of things will happen. So I think in terms of biases and checking biases, I think that the current system of doing so is already good enough to scrutinize judges a lot more, to give them feedback and to say what kinds of biases are they exhibiting. Um, yeah, I think one thing that I would encourage more debaters to do is to actually when they submit judge feedback, like I know a lot of debaters don't listen to OAs. Sometimes I also don't listen to OAs if I'm very like out of it. But I try my best to, and I try my best to also give like feedback for OAs. I think that's something that's very important. So like give them like a 7 or like a 10 or like a 9. Substantiating it with a bit more depth about certain kinds of biases that they're exhibiting would at least make sure that CAPs know how to allocate them more holistically in like rounds moving forward. Those kinds of things.
True. There are a lot of other problems also when you are, say, considering the issues around, say, judge scoring as well as peak scoring, because of course there also subjectivity does, like how much do people perceive the particular speech to be, or the particular like discussion to be, or particular way to be, is very very subjective to the end of the day. You can't eradicate all of those subjectivities. But there are a couple of interesting pointers that come around here as well, right? Because you mentioned there are places where people might not approach your accent, or maybe the way that you're speaking, or the style in which you're speaking, that evidently or that well. So what do you think should be like the approach when people are facing these kind of issues, like when they're having problems acclimatizing to accents of other people, or say there are problems in terms of going into debate internationally and not feeling that comfortable in that zone right now because they're not experienced in that particular region, because they're not capable of understanding maybe what the speaker is mentioning at times, because of, say, maybe not getting the examples correctly down, or maybe not tracking the speeches as well. So how do you think that this can be?
I think the best way to approach this is that if you're going for international major, if you're going for like an international tournament, let's say where there's a sizable chunk of people that are not the same as you. So maybe these are people from like Eastern Europe, people from Africa that have like noticeably different accent than those from Southeast Asia. I think the best way if you want to acclimatize yourself and if you really want to do well in these tournaments is to just go on like because I feel like debating has become democratized to some extent. So you do see like YouTube videos about these things, and I do think that even in like what is it? Even in like judge tests for a lot of tournaments, they test you on certain accent biases. So I think the best way to get around it is just to um like acclimatize to it preemptively, which means that you watch YouTube videos of African debaters debating certain motions, or you see Eastern European debaters debating these motions. I think that is generally quite helpful because I think it you gradually get used to their accent, you gradually get used to the arguments that they're making, and you're like, okay, now I feel more comfortable listening to the accent and knowing what they're saying. Obviously, sometimes it's a very hard process because it's very hard to get used to an accent that you're previously very unfamiliar to, and it's your first time hearing those kinds of accents. So I'm think to me the best way of going around that has always been to just watching a bit more YouTube videos about the way in which they speak, or like debate videos from those areas, from like PAUDC, from things from like EUDC, or even like any ADC as well. And I do think that just watching those videos, I think at least gets you the teaser of what you're going to expect going for like worlds or going for like other international tournaments where you would see certain these things happening as well. I think that's it's either is that and spars like going like sparring against teams on like different demographic will also evidently help as well. Um, Sometimes teams will come up to me and then they ask do you want to spar, because right now we have like teams like from like white speaking countries or like English speaking countries like EPL countries, and then they're like we want someone to like have a ESL like ESL country or whatever to speak, and then um obviously it's I think a very good way to just like check your own biases or check whether or not you're tracking the arguments correctly.
Very true. There are a couple of interesting pointers here, right? You mentioned a couple of things around the idea of how people can approach things by taking part in drills and doing certain activities which will help them improve. In general, also, I think there are a lot of things that people have the scope to improve, and they're talking about issues like practical skills, like accents and other stuff as well. So, is there anything else that you particularly notice that are effective drills when you are a speaker or a judge to help improve your case, apart from, say, the ones that you mentioned right now?
But basically I think the judge that I've done this quite well is just always just to go for online tournaments. I feel like online tournaments are actually pretty nice when it comes to exposing yourself to a variety of different like demographic and like people from different continents. So I've seen like how Australian speaks, I've seen how the Filipinos speak, and I've already gotten very used to that. So I think um it's pretty general advice, I would say, going for tournaments, going for spas, watching debate videos, those kinds of things. But I think the difference is that you're going in with a different set of purposes. So you're not going there for the purpose of tracking a speech, because maybe you're doing that well already. Maybe you know how to track a speech. Maybe you know how to do the proper weighing. So maybe you already know what you are good at as a judge or as a debater. So when you watch these YouTube videos, I think the purpose or the mindset that you need to have is to just check out the main objective that you're trying to do. So if the purpose is to check your own biases and making sure that you don't overcredit like an EPL speaker or undercredit an EFL speaker, I think the best way to do it, I think the best way is just to watch a debate video and say, am I tracking properly? Are there anything that I'm missing in this debate? Am I like is the EFL speaker saying something but it's just phrased in a very weird manner? Am I like checking those things? I think those are things that you can do. So I think the general drills are the same. Like I would say spars or whatever. I think those are the same. I think the biggest difference is just in terms of what is your objective. Because if you're good at weighing, if you're good at all these different other things, then it's to identify the things that you're not good at and to work on those things a bit more and to focus on to focus on those things a bit more during the drills that you're already doing, I guess.
True. Let's just talk about another section of discussion, right? Like we are talking about things from different perspectives. We've talked about things around how local biases might creep in, how different local issues might creep in. But you're specifically debating from Malaysia, right? So, is there anything specific about your circuit that you've noticed that is very interesting, or maybe something that is very unique towards how people from your region are debating?
I don't think so. The thing is, I'm not very like a meta kind of person, so I don't like really like go into the theories of like the comparative difference between a Malaysian debater and like a Filipino debater. I guess the biggest difference is just in terms of um I guess the biggest difference is just perhaps the way that we structure our speeches. So I feel like in a lot of different other places it's a lot more meticulous, it's a lot more structured. But I feel like in Malaysia, I feel like there's always like it's rather than being like a particular structure, it's more like a flow kind of state. So you're going from one to this to this to this. So that might be good or that might be bad, but I feel see a lot of debaters just engaging in very flowy kind of speech as opposed to engaging in things like structure. And I think that's fine in the Malaysian circuit. But again, I'll just preface by saying that I'm a very vibes based person, so I don't actively think about the kinds of differences that I like when I see like a Malaysian debate, like Malaysian debaters going against like Filipino debaters. I my go-to mind isn't like what is the how is like what's the meta difference in the way that they're speaking. I'm usually just checking the arguments, checking like whether or not like their responses, like whether or not they're weighing speech as well, those kinds of things. So I think in Malaysia specifically, I wouldn't say there's like a very big difference. I guess the current thing that I found out that when I was talking to my friend is that in Malaysia, I guess framing has become a significantly more important. So I think debaters in Malaysia oftentimes try to win debates outright through framing, and a lot of the debate is less about analysis. It's more about winning on certain metrics or winning on framing alone. So even in deputy speeches, a lot of it is more like here is the framing that wins you the round, as opposed to engaging in more direct kinds of responses. And I do think that like that's something that most Malaysians either subconsciously or subconsciously are doing a bit more often now, which is to just win on their own metric, and the debate becomes less about like directly responding to certain arguments, but rather just engaging in the more tug of war kind of format of like, okay, here's why you should credit our metric a bit more. Here's why our framing wins you the debate outright. And whether or not that makes for very good or bad debates, I'm not entirely sure. I think good or bad debates that did occur because of this shift in like in terms of an emphasis towards framing.
True. There is a couple of things that we have in terms of our unawareness about the circuit as well. I'm pretty sure. So, if I'm somebody from, say, outside Malaysia and I'm looking in, what are the key tournaments that happens in your circuit? What are the key events that happens in the calendar year? What are some unique things that we can participate in as well, which you can mention to us?
So I guess the best example of this would be the two nationals that we host. We host MNUDC, which is the like AP nationals, and we also have MNIDC, which is the BP nationals. So those two tournaments are our like our annual tournaments that we will host. It goes through a bidding process, and the excos are like elected and whatnot as opposed to being appointed. So that those I think are the two most important like varsity level tournaments that we have. Another thing that I used to be very active in, not very active, but rather I would look forward enthusiastically, would be the world school selections. So I used to also go for world schools before. I will also use frequently apply for their selections. And I think to me, these three events are by far the biggest one. Um, After COVID hit, I think it kind of decimated the circuit a bit more. So I think there are tournaments that used to be very, very big that are no longer as big. And they're trying to like regain back their traction. I think the best example of this would be like Taylor's Mid Open, where back then it would be like a very big tournament. Mara National Novice would be like in like really, really huge. Malaysia Debate Open I think was the most recent one, whereby um back then it was like a very huge tournament. Everyone from like the Philippines, from Singapore will come over and debate. But now I think it's like a more like Malaysian kind of thing. And I think part of that is because of COVID, that I think it killed the circuit. It killed the circuit, and the circuit has like a relatively harder time trying to recover from it. But I also do think it's like it's very expensive to fly to Malaysia now. It's very expensive to go here and there. And I think um obviously a lot of the tournaments that are happening in Malaysia right now, we are still trying to find our footing. We're still trying to make sure that more people from all across, not only just like different Malaysian states, but also from different countries are willing to participate in our tournaments.
True, but there are of course always problems in terms of things, because I think even during the COVID-19, the access issues sort of eradicated. There were a lot more people going for a lot more tournaments because everything was happening online, and then things sort of like panded out to it. So there is a lot of discussion and scope for improvement as well in terms of accessibility and the things around it. But you were somebody who also debated during university. So are there any specific experience from your university time when you were debating that is very interesting in terms of how you can find it out, and how did you find university debating around, and what kind of experiences did you lead to?
So to be fair, this is my first year. I'm my first year in uni yet, and I've only recently I started this like quite recently as well. Um, I think a lot of my most formative years in debating has been in college debating. So this was like my pre-university, because the Malaysian education system works in a very different way. Um, I think what was very interesting to me was that when I was in at Sami College, I think I joined a lot more like um international tournaments that are online, and I think that really helped in terms of like just making me like a lot sharper in terms of my arguments and in terms of my responses. Um, what was particularly interesting, I guess, was the shift towards online debating. So for at one point, a lot of it was online. So like UADC was online. UADC 2022 and 2023 were both online, and when I went into Sunway, things were only starting to become offline or become hybrid. So the first ever tournament that I went to that was in person wasn't like some random open. It was Bali AVP, and I was like, whoa, like because back then I used to be a very huge advocate for accessibility. I want all majors and every tournament to be online. It's like, why not online? Like it saves you time, it saves you resources, it saves you like a lot of like logistical issues. But then I went to like Bali, and I went to like a couple of other tournaments that were held offline. And I was like, oh, maybe there are some merits in terms of it being offline, which is like the kinds of community that you get, the fun that you would have, like the physical, like something about physical tournaments that I think just makes it very hard for people to want to shift towards online. Because I think people really do value not debating in front of a screen, and people do value like a more, I would say, like celebratory break night, because I think it's a bit sad if your break night is just like in a Zoom, and like you're like just making first and then, woo, and everyone's like whatever. But if you go to if you go to like a physical tournament, it's like everyone is cheering for you, and there's such a it's such like a good feeling to have. And even if you don't break right, it's the fact that like people come up to you and like they hit you on the shoulder like commiserations, you did really, really well, by the way. I think it's that kind of thing that I really, really do appreciate, that you don't really get in online debate, that you don't really get in online debating. So I do think that's obviously a trade-off that has to be made between both accessibility and also the general fun that people like, what actually attracts people to go for tournaments, which is the fact that it's physical, which is the fact that after the tournament there's like socials, there's like drinking, there's like a lot of different other activities they can partake in that people also find to be very, very enjoyable.
Right. So you've mentioned a couple of regional majors as well. I'm pretty sure that there are different unique experiences that you've had leading up to regional majors. So what were your like unique stories from doing majors as well? What kind of majors have you attended, which you can let our viewers and listeners know?
Okay, so I think there are two main ones. I think the first one was Malaysia UADC 2022. I think the year where I think Bea was on CA. So I went into that tournament. I went as a judge for that tournament because when I was at that age, I was like, okay, I can still qualify for one more year of world schools. I don't know why I really want to qualify for world schools. I was like, I really want to go for world schools because it's like a free trip. I really want to go for it. So I was like, I don't want to debate. because the world school's condition is that you can't debate representing a uni, but it says nothing about judging. So I'm like, okay, I can judge. So I was like, you know what, that's a fair trade-off. So a week before the tournament, I went for M&S BP, which is like a local schools like BP tournament, and I was like the second worst judge there. Like I scored like 2.4 out of 5, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's quite bad. And then I went to UADC. I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna flop this so bad. And then every round I was like panel, 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 panel. I'm like, okay, at least I'm not trainee, right? I'm not demoting, but I'm not being promoted. Then the final, I was promoted to a chair. I'm like, okay, something has happened. It was a chair in a bin room, admittedly, like a semi dead room. And I was like, okay, I was like, okay, at least I'm a chair. And then I was like, okay, whatever. And then after then, I wasn't really expecting to break because it's like, okay, I was only chair in like the final round, and I was paneling every single round before that. It feels kind of bad. And then it was announced that I broke. I'm like, oh, this is my second ever tournament judging, and I just broke at the majors. I'm like, oh wow, this is like really really interesting. And I think that to me has really been like quite um I would say nice to me because I think it does prove that like even with very limited experience, if you're able to go for spars, if you're able to just engage in things that are not competition related but are still somewhat related like spars or like debate videos to train yourself, I think you can still break at like regional majors and whatnot. I think the second most important memory that I have about debating under Sunway was Ma- I would say Malaysia ABP because I think Malaysia ABP was the one where um I went into like very very scared because I'm a very like anxious, very pessimistic kind of person, and then I went to Malaysia ABP with like the mindset of okay, because the week before that we didn't break at I think Diliman pre ABP, and I was like very like oh my god, we didn't break, how did we not break? So I was like very like distraught, and then I think I took that a bit more into Malaysia ABP. So when it was announced that we broke second at ABP, I was like, no way! Like I was like, no way we broke second at ABP. And then the whole night was just, I guess, in a daze. So I was just like people just coming up to me and be like, oh, congrats, thank you so much, thank you so much. And I think one of the reasons why that struck a very core memory in me was that I always thought I was a very big nobody in debating. So oh, people are like, oh, whatever, it's like my second ever tournament. I don't think like people know me that well. But when people are like coming up to me like, congrats, congrats, you're doing so well, like, I'm cheering for you, like, oh well, people like kind of know me and like, oh, people and like people support me. And I'm like, oh wow, I'm no longer as like unknown as I used to think I am in debating. And I think that's why uh first I think that was my first ever experience where in me at least I thought, oh wow, maybe I should give debating a more like long term prospect. Maybe I can engage in this sport far longer. And I think partially it is because of the fact that people did come up to me and they were like cheering me on. I was like, wow, um, I kind of like that feeling. I kind of like when people like provided me that kind of validation or provided me that kind of support, and it really like was something that resonated quite highly with me. So I do think that like Malaysia ABP, the fact that it was physical and the fact that all of these things were happening, I think was what conclusively persuaded me to um like continue debating afterwards. Because I think because after AVP, I was like, I'm retiring. I'm gonna retire. I'm retiring. I'm never gonna engage in debating ever again. Because I was like, I need to touch grass and I need to find something better. But after that, I was like, you know, even in debating, you can still touch grass. Like sometimes people in debate like go for things like badminton or whatever. Like, oh, you know, like um, I think now looking back at it, it's always been a lot more and as cliche as it is, it's always been a lot more about the friends that you make and the kind of person that you are that's very very important in debating. And I think that philosophy has really struck quite well with me, because if you're someone that's really good at debating but people don't really like you, maybe because you are very unpleasant to be around, maybe you're very arrogant, maybe like you are, you know, someone that just people are very uncomfortable around. Even if you break, no one's gonna be there to celebrate together with you. If you don't break, people won't be there to like commiserate you. So I do think that being in this sport where you have to interact with a lot of people, I do think what it has convinced me is that there is also reward for you to be a good person, to be a nice person, and even if you don't break or even if you are in a very competitive environment where sometimes your emotions might get the better of you, um it should it shouldn't take away from the fact that you should still try to be a good person to not only yourself but also to the people around you. I think that was a very valuable lesson that I learned that I learned at Malaysia AGP.
Very true. I think the first thing that comes around from this discussion is the idea that, yeah, debating might give you highs and lows, but it might also be very important to consider that what cost it might incur in terms of your physical well-being, mental well-being. Because I think there's a lot of problems that are also associated with debating as an activity, which people generally take a lot to heart in terms of them being so overtly competitive that they spew some sort of like negative emotions onto themselves and onto others as well, which is something which is very avoidable, as you were mentioning. But let's just talk a bit about how, say, people who are approaching their first major should be, or how they can prepare better, before we move on to the next section as well. So if somebody is going in as a speaker or a judge into their first regional majors or any major competition for that matter, what sort of like advice or what sort of like preparation strategies could you suggest to them?
Um, I guess there are a few. So I think when I went into my first ever majors, which is Malaysia ABP, um, like as a debater lah. I think one of the biggest thing that I thought one of the biggest consideration I had was like, um, what is your purpose to go to major? Is it to break or is it something else? Because I think a lot of people, especially if you're part of the A or the B team, go in with the mindset that you want to bring in the tournament. So I think the first thing that you always should consider, even before you get into the team, or even before you sign up to selection, is to just ask yourself, um, what am I really doing this major for? Are there any reasons beyond baking that I'm considering doing this major? Is it because there are friends that I really value? Is it because I really like the location? Maybe I like going to these places and exploring it a bit more. Um, so those kinds of factors that you can also I think people should also consider, like even before you make it into the team. I think the biggest question that you should always ask yourself is, are you mentally prepared to not break, as opposed to are you mentally prepared to break? And I think asking yourself that, and just I guess giving yourself the comfort and the grace to be like, it's fine, it's my first ever majors, where obviously it is going to be very overwhelming because you see a lot of people there and you will see a lot of people interacting with different people, and you can feel the air of competition around you. And I think what is very important is not to let that get the best of you. So I think even within the air of competition, try and find something that makes you very happy. Very funnily enough, like 2 weeks ago, I went for Malaysia Debate Open. We didn't break. We are the like the first reserve team. We are the like third highest on speaks, but we didn't have enough points to break. So I was like, so it's such a missed opportunity. And I was just like very like, oh my god, why is this happening? But then I was sad for like 10 minutes, and then afterwards I was like, on the right side, I can now get the soya that I really wanted to get at the stall of right next to my hotel. I'm like, okay, you know what? Maybe not debating is a good thing because I have more time to be able to spend doing other things that I might be happier doing as well. Maybe I can go take pictures of like certain like very unique location or whatever. Like obviously you still feel sad, and part of your subconscious is going to feel very like, why did I break, why did I break? But I think beyond that, you can always numb that pain. You can explore new areas, you can go to different places, you can just do the things that you really want to do, because you're in a whole different country, so why not do those things, like why not just explore the country a bit more, like yeah, you're not debating or judging the out rounds, and that's fine. That's okay. Like go around, explore. You don't have to rush the out rounds. You can just um like go to a mall, go to a park, like take pictures of the things that you really want to take pictures of. Go to a museum for all I care. Like there's so many things that you can do that I think gives you a lot more joy than breaking. Another thing that I also figured out is that the moment that you break at a tournament, it's a very fleeting emotion. And I think the best example of this was Malaysia UADC 2023, the online version that was hosted by Intertext. Um, so we're all at the bar. We're kind of just like drinking. Like, okay, the break announcement is being delayed. Like, oh, when is it gonna happen? When is it gonna happen? And then at a certain point in time, it was announced that we were the 15 or the 14 breaking team. And I was like very happy for like a solid 10 minutes. So like, yeah, let's go. Then we were drinking and whatever. After 10 minutes, I was like, okay, time to go back and do my law assignment that I forgot to do. So I've like like reality will always come back at you, you will always find certain commitments outside debating that, oh yeah, I have to do this by the way. So I think reality hits you. whether or not you like it or not. When you don't bake or when you bake, you will find things outside debating that will inevitably hit you. And I think it's just to get outside of that debating bubble to be like, it is fine if I don't do other things. And um, people think that not breaking is the end of the world when I can first tell you firsthand that if you do not break at the majors, it is fine. It's your first ever majors. You have so many other majors that you can do well at. Um, I think if you go to serious posting, there are people that posted about like why they continue debating even after they didn't break. Some people only broke at their fifth or their fourth major, and you find joy in a lot of other different things. And I think one of the best joy that you ever find is your community, is the late night drinking session with your friends, is the late night supper with the people around you, it's the tour guiding session with friends with your international friends as well. Yeah. So I think yeah, that's generally my advice to a lot of people is that amid the competitive nature of breaking versus not breaking, find joy in other things. And it is not as hard as it is. I think people do find joy in other things. I think that's wonderful.
Possibly when we are also explaining a lot of ideas around, say, going into competitions and talking to people and learning more things, I think it's also very prudent to also mention the fact that maybe it is not that easy for us to be social, but debate is also like a social and comparative sport. Like it, you have to be there, you have to compete against people, but you also have some opportunities to network, to make friends, to become better. So how do you like perceive these social aspects of debating, and do you think that they're relevant in terms of you doing tournaments? And I remember that you said that online tournaments are more accessible. I also of the same idea that online tournaments are more accessible at the end of the day and help a lot more in terms of bridging the access issue, which a lot of countries where debating usually occurs have faced in the past and are continuing to face as well. So where do you find yourself positioned around this like social ambit and accessibility ambit of debating?
I guess so as someone that as someone that don't have a lot of access in my previous time in debating, because I'm in East Malaysia and there's just not a lot of competition going around. I've always been a very huge advocate for accessibility. So I'm like, yeah, we should make tournaments online, we should do all these different things to make sure that debating stays accessible, to make sure that debating stays online, because it was a very good opportunity for me to be able to start where I'm at. I think the way in which debating happens now is that I think there ought to be a mix between the two. So I feel like online tournaments are quite good, and I think we should have a lot more online opens. And I feel like online opens are like pretty fun to engage in. And I think um obviously there's like multiple tournaments happening on the same weekend. There are physical ones, there are online ones. I think teams can pick and choose which one they want to do. But I do think that like the way to solve accessibility isn't through just making tournaments online. There are still other ways in which you're able to solve accessibility in terms of in person debating. Recently we have seen like Pakistan Debate Forum doing things like what is it like fundraising for their teams to go to Worlds. We have seen Uhuru Worlds that's been immensely important for the development of more like underrepresented scene to send teams to Worlds. We have seen the global circuit at least trying to attempting to make debating more accessible in person as well. So I do think that those are all like I think it's a collective effort kind of thing, whereby I think people are just um knowing how important accessibility is, do want to ensure that it remains both in person yet accessible. And I do think that the best way to do so is through things like scholarships, is through things um like what is it like collective funding, like collective fundraising. If you're from like a private university where you're not funded by the government, sometimes it also helps to ask your uni for help as well. I'm aware that some unis are not very supportive of debating, in which case I do think that like the next best thing you can do is to do things like fundraising tournaments, is to do things like having donation drives or like charity drives to send things towards. I think those are pretty like important. Um, okay. So another thing that I also found out is that I agree. I think a lot of debaters are like there's a very social aspect of debating in person, and so I'm a very introverted person. In fact, I'm very, very reserved. If you ever see me interacting with my batchmates or with a lot of the people from my law faculty, I don't really talk a lot. Because I think one of the reasons is because I just speak mainly Malay, I speak English, and my Malay is very terrible. Um so I'm a very like reserved and very closed off kind of person. But I think the reasons why I think in debating it's a bit better is because I think in debating, like I think it kind of forces you to have some sort of interaction, right? Like it's not like very personal interaction. You can just be discussing the motion. You can be like, how did I thought, like, no, do you think this really works? I feel like there might be other ways to go around this, or you just talk to your judge about different things. And I feel like that's good as a starting point for a lot of conversations to occur, which that at least now there's at least the grounded idea that, you know, both of you are very interested in debating, and now there's at least like a conversation that you are able to have, be it about the motion, about the tournament, about like the country that you're at right now. Like these are all like pretty like interesting conversations for you to have. Like I met a lot of people at Vietnam Worlds, and I'm taught, and I think the go-to conversation starter is, how do you find Vietnam? Is it really fun? Like, have you done anything here? Are there any recommendation? Like, I think there's a lot of conversation starters that you're able to have. Because these are all debaters and they all at least have semi similar interests, at least a very unified interest in debating. And I think that's pretty like good already. So I think the reason as to why I'm a bit more sociable in debating relative to any other sport is because to me, um it's something that really does pique my interest. I do like discussing these things with people. Like a lot of people think that it's like a nerd talk. It's like a very boring, like whatever. It's like like you're just intellectually like trying to assert your superiority. When I feel like to me it's like, oh, I just want to talk about these things because I find them to be interesting. And I think that the reason as why I find in-person majors to be so important is because um it's very hard for you to break out of that bubble in online debating, because after the round you just kind of like you are just like mute yourself and then you close the camera like this, and then like nothing happens. You wait for the judge to give the OA and you're like, okay, thank you, and then you mention for feedback. I just don't think that's very like um that's not very like fun. So I feel like I think a very important part of physical debating is that you have these interactions, and I think these interactions are always the foundation for very wonderful relationships or very wonderful friendships.
True. In case somebody is not that comfortable doing so, it's very hard for them to like approach the activity also very positively. So I think there's a lot of consideration to be had when you're talking about the socializing aspect about debating as well, because right, you may be going into a tournament, you're very nervous because you're a novice or there's some other issue that goes on for you as well. So that becomes an entire consideration or an entire thought process that you have, where you're running this idea that what am I going to do? Am I going to be comfortable? Am I going to be embarrassed? Am I going to do well or not do well? So here also you mentioned a very interesting factor, right? That you need to cull your expectations so that you don't feel very like unhappy with the outcomes of your debating journey and debating exercise, but also you feel very much in tune with what you're doing. So in the last couple of things that I would like to like discuss with you, let's just go into the general fabric of how debating certain themes and certain aspects have worked out. I think there are a lot of different nuances that we can discuss here. So we discussed a bit about drills that you suggested for speakers. We discussed a bit about other aspects where you said that these are the places where people can improve. So as we go into this last section, what are the like few very key things that you would say a debater needs to have as like a person who's going into say judging or speaking? What kind of like pain points can somebody expect, and what kind of like expectations do you need to manage when you're going into this activity?
I think for a lot of people that go into debating, I think the first thing that you always need to have is quite obviously interest and passion. Like if you don't have those things, it kind of it's like redundant, because um, debating does require you to put in a lot of effort and a lot of commitment that if you can't put, then there's just no point. You're engaging in a sport that you don't find a lot of joy in. So I do think that's like the foremost important thing. I think something that's very important to have as a debater, especially if you're starting out, is just um a lot more intuition. So because you are a debating that's starting out, you presumably don't have a lot of knowledge about a lot of different things. Or maybe your general knowledge isn't really that good, or like isn't really that like well fleshed out, and that's fine. But I do think that it's more of an intuition thing. So if like you have like pretty good or at least somewhat okay intuition, you're like, yeah, but I don't think that's good though, because like you're harming people here. Like you're doing it in terms of conversation, but um I think having the intuition or having the vibes of what a debate ought to be, I think really helps, because it's like having normal, like a lot of our daily conversation that we have with people with people can also be debates. Like albeit not like intellectual-ish debate. You can talk about the best Black Mirror episode. I thought it was eulogy. You can talk about what is your favorite anime. You can talk about what is your favorite genre. And a lot of these are very vibes-based things. But I feel like just having a baseline intuition of what is or what is not a good argument, I think it's already good enough. You don't have to really justify it in depth, right? But if you just know or can kind of just feel it, I think that's really good enough. I think as a starting point, because I think then I think when you have intuition, it is vastly supplemented by your general knowledge, by how much you know about the world, by a lot of these things. Um, I've not been a very big advocate for the division of debating into like weighing, impact, analysis, why is it true, why is it false kind of thing. To me, I think debating is more like comes off as being a bit more intuitive for me. So for me, debating has always just been a bit more like why does this not make sense? Like, why is there anything about this argument that's empirically untrue? Like those kinds of things that I would think is I think makes debating a bit more persuasive, at least in my opinion. So like obviously it's good to have structure. It's good to have like three layers of analysis on an argument. But I do think that like um before structure, you at least need to find what are the three layers of analysis first. And I think that is what I would say would be intuition. So what is your intuitive idea of things like the social contract theory, or what is your intuitive idea of what is not a good argument? Like, why do you think that smoking is bad? And if you think that just because something is bad, do you think it should be banned? Then you can just give your general ideas about these things. I think um yeah, I think to me that's generally what I think a debater needs to have first and foremost, which is just intuition. Because everything else after intuition is just honing that intuition to be like, how do I make it more precise? How do I contextualize it? How do I make it more structured? So I think the thing that you need to have the most is intuition, because that intuition is how you structure different things, how you mold your speeches into different like styles, different speeches, different rhetorics, and I think those kinds of things. In terms of expectation, if you're a new debater, um, I'm just gonna be very honest. Um, you are going to have a pretty hard time, and I think that is why it's very important for you to have a support structure. Because to me, in my when I first started out debating, when it was online, not only did I not break at 10 consecutive tournaments, I was bottom tabbing I think 3 or 4 of those tournaments as well. Like just 10 tournaments in a row, I just did not break. I'm like, okay, wow, I'm terrible. And then I always have the mindset that like, oh, I'm still learning about different things. I'm still very interested. And once I have a support structure, once I have people that are willing to do this sport together with me, I found joy in those things as well. So I think part of me is because I've been desensitized to the idea of not breaking a tournament. But I also do think that it's partly that like after not breaking with my friend, I'm like, okay, let's go out and eat. Let's go and talk about different things. Let's go like watch a movie or something. And I think that's also what makes it fun. So to me, I think that is like um how I would say to manage your expectation, which is that it will be a pretty rough experience. Some of you might have it smoother than others.
Just the last couple of segments are left. So the last thing that I possibly would want to discuss here, Raymond, is the idea that we have discussed so extensively about how people have been, how social issues are, how your journey through debating is, how different approaches to majors and other things have occurred. So as we conclude, what were a couple of things that you would like to say to people who are watching this or listening into this, and what are your final thoughts?
Um, I would say that like to a lot of people that are starting out in debating, I am not the only one, but I do think that I'm a very proud product and a very proud beneficiary of accessible debating. And I'm like evidence that like people can be really, really bad and really, really like terrible when they start out debating, and to actually find the like capacity and the ability to improve, especially if you have the right people that are willing to support you. Back then, I like if you told like I know 13-year-old me that one day I'll be giving like coaching sessions to people in some way, or one day I'll be on a podcast, or I will be debating in like international majors. I don't think he would really believe me. I think he'll be like, oh, yeah, like it's like a normal sport, man. Why are you doing all this? But I think as time progressed, I do think that like um as long as you do find interest in debating, um it is okay for you to quit if you want to, if you feel like the sport isn't giving you a lot of joy. But I do think that when you're in the sport, try to find as much joy and as much happiness as possible. Because I do think that debating can be pretty harsh, it can be pretty cruel. Jaws can mess you up, emotions can mess you up. So many things are like luck based in debating as well. And even no matter how good you are as a debater, sometimes you just cannot escape like how unlucky you are in certain rounds or in certain odd rounds. Yeah. So I do think that like part of it is just finding a greater purpose in debating beyond yourself. So contributing back to your community, contributing back to your circuit, making sure that your juniors feel like welcome in the sport, for instance. I think that's always been like something that has motivated me quite a bit. So I personally think that I've overstayed my welcome in the circuit already. Or I feel like I've been in the circuit long enough. I'm like, okay, people are like, yeah, okay, why is he still here? Why is he still debating? Um, so I do think that I have like a higher purpose right now. So a lot of the Malaya juniors that are currently in Malaya, I won't say their names, but a lot of them are really good, have really immense potential, and I do hope they continue debating afterwards. Um, Sometimes things might not go their way. Sometimes they don't break a tournament. Sometimes they are like, they break second and then they lose in the first out round and they feel really bummed out. And I think um it is okay. But I do think I just want to be there for them. I want to be like, if they're bummed out, it's fine. We can still do better in our next tournament. So I just kind of want to be like a support structure for a lot of people. Back then, because back then I had a support structure system that convinced me not to quit. Um and I want to be that for a lot of people right now. So I'm trying to do my best to return to the community. And I feel a lot of people, if they are beneficiaries of these kinds of things, should also try and help the communities back one way or another. You don't have to do it in the ways that I'm doing it, but you can also just like afford to like judge one of the rounds. You can just be there for like one tournament, judge like IA tournaments for free. Like there's a lot of different other things that you can do that wouldn't take up a lot of your time or a lot of your commitment. And I think that's fine. Like um I think a lot of juniors, or at least a lot of people that are starting out debating, appreciate a lot of these very small gestures. Because to you they might be small, but to them it might be the line at which they either quit or continue debating. And I think that's something that's like really important for seniors or for a lot of like people that are really established in debate to understand, which is that a lot of the things that they say hold weight, a lot of the things that they do hold significant amounts of influence. And I do think that like to me I just want to make sure that my juniors right now, um, especially those that have like a huge amount of potential and huge amount of interest, can continue to like stay in debating and do well in this sport. Otherwise, I feel like it's a pity if they leave because the environment is so toxic. Maybe people don't look up to them. Maybe it's because there's a hierarchy kind of thing. I think even if there is a hierarchy, I just feel like um just making sure that the space is, even if it's not like super healthy, because obviously if you go to a major sometimes it can get very overwhelming, but I just do generally like the notion of people being there for you and like, and how do I say it, people being there for you and making sure that you're okay after tournaments and those kinds of things. And so like I'm going for Guangzhou UADC and I'm having some of my juniors are also going to go there, and I think that's fine. I do hope that like I see a lot more people at like Kuantan ABP as well because it's in Malaysia and it's rare to have it outside of KL. So I do hope that a lot of like smaller institutions do come, like UMK, UTP, Unimas, a lot of these institutions that are previously active during the online generation but have really died down because of COVID. I do hope that at least make the effort to come to Kuantan ABP because I feel like it's like a once in a blue moon kind of thing, like when we ever have another major being hosted in Kuantan, especially the support of like the state or the support of like your admins or whatever. So I do feel like I hope that um a lot of my juniors can go for these tournaments, and even if they don't perform well, I at least do hope that they find it to be an enjoyable experience. And that doesn't only extend to my juniors, but to a lot of the very small institutions that exist within Malaysia right now that are outside the Klang Valley region that I think is really, really important. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of like my advice. I think it's like just very generic advice. I do think that it's like very important to just um keep that advice very grounded in terms of interacting with like people that are not as established as you.
True. Thank you so much, Raymond, for agreeing to come on board with us and discuss so many interesting ideas and thoughts. I'm pretty sure our viewers and listeners will get a lot from you as well and the conversations that we have had. Thank you again, and we hope to see you again soon.
Alright, thanks so much, Kaushik.